Vidmori POV. It was a surprise, to say the least, when Basti tackled me down to the ground. The cubs were fine, though Grim seemed surprised by the whole exchange, but in the end, he was just happy to be involved in whatever was happening. The people were taken aback, but appeared to be more confused, and perhaps even amused at the scene developing before them. Basti's tail had flicked this way and that, her whole body seemingly rumbling with delight, as I felt her unintentionally flexing her claws into my back. Zassatir spoke up first, looking pleasantly amused as he looked between Basti and me, before looking back at me. "I suppose there are others you left out regarding your latest change," he mused, before looking at the others. "Come along now, everyone. No point in standing around. We have work to do." This sent some smirks of amusement from some of the adults, though the kids were just happy to see Basti stopping by. The Cubs and Grim lounged around for a few moments, but they also dispersed, going off to play with the other kids or hang around their mentors. "So, I guess you're cozy where you are?" I asked, as I glanced back up to Basti. While my new wooden body was definitely strong, I was not in any sort of position to properly resist or squirm free. Not that I was actively trying to do so. She rumbled out another purr before leaning in and whispering once more. "Consider it as punishment for not telling me you were planning on getting a physical body," she mused almost mischievously, as she now began to knead her paws into my back. While it felt nice in a way, the sensation of relief wasn't really there, considering I wasn't really made of meat like a normal person. Though as her paws kneaded against me, I could sense that she had a realization, as she let out a huff that sounded vaguely disappointed. "You're made of wood?" she asked quietly, confusion plain in her voice, as she let herself flop down against me and rested her chin atop my head. "Why are you wood?" "Well, probably because this was all rather impromptu," I replied with vague amusement. Revere surprised me with this avatar. As she put it, a real body is probably a long way away, but for now this will have to do if I want to be mobile. I just laid there for the time being, the pressure of her weight being quite apparent to me. However, it wasn't uncomfortable, the sensation of pain apparently not registering. However, considering that I can now leave my bubble, I was considering joining you on your mission to the hegemony. I'll follow from afar and see what I can do while you assume the role of Dahlia, I mentioned, a smile on my face as I slowly shifted around to look up at her more directly. Basti's eyes dilated with anticipation at that suggestion, humming some more as she stood and slinked off of me before lying in the dirt. I really like that idea," she mentioned, as her ears flicked and wiggled. Now that I am free from the confines of my right hand, I go about standing while dusting myself off. It'll be interesting to see the world beyond the confines of my forest. I have memories of the place, but I like to see it for myself, maybe make some connections and find some real friends. If I were flesh and blood, I could swear my heart would be racing with the idea of an expedition. It had been years since I had ventured into new territory. Even the warehouse that got me killed had been mapped, though obviously it wasn't adequately scouted. But that was beside the point now. Basti hummed thoughtfully at that before nodding. "There are many targets, as you know. It'll take a lot of work to deal with all of them," she mentioned, her tail lashing and curling as she considered the task before us. I couldn't help but agree. I've dismantled many groups before. It usually just requires the removal of leaders or key figures in the group to create disorder and leave hostile groups in shambles. However, the difference here is that this is a civilized land, with a lot more people and stable influence and structure. Nothing like the volatile apocalypse I had grown accustomed to. So, Basti was right. It would take a lot of time, at least until I find a suitable figurehead or faction to oppose these slavers for me. Hence the need for me to go and try to find friends and allies. It will be a good way to gauge our neighbours and the people who make up the general populace. Basti seemed to nod intently, and I could tell that she was at least getting most of the concepts I'm running by her, probably thanks to Dahlia's memories. Again, it sounds like a lot of work. What about home, the mountain and the haven? Are you going to just leave them be? She asked, as her head tilted curiously. I considered that, soon glancing over at the faint, intangible thread that connected this body to my core at the top of the mountain. I think I can manage to maintain both, though I'm certain I can rely on Ururu to look out over the home front for the day-to-day if need be. I consider, as I look back over at her. I may be inhabiting this body, but it's still only an avatar. My true body is still my core at the top of the mountain. I'm fairly certain I can change my focus between this body and my bubble of influence, I explained, guessing for now, since I didn't want to experiment out in the open on the off chance that returning back to my core would make my avatar collapse like a sack of potatoes. This appeased Basti, as she nodded intently. I see. I suppose I ought to get back to my training, if we are to leave as soon as possible, she considered, seemingly a little somber, as she watched our cubs among the people before looking to our mountain. I don't think I've ever truly had a place to call home. My memories of life weren't exactly clear. All I knew was that I was alone, and my hunts were poor in the last few weeks with my cubs on the way, she said softly. I knew of her life before me, though it was interesting to hear it from her perspective. As she spoke, I decided to sit down beside her, my legs crossed as I scooted closer, before reaching out and gently running my wooden fingers through her head fur. Basti seemed to smile softly, while shifting around as she laid her head on my lap, as she continued to speak. I went up that mountain to die that day. Something in my basic, animalistic mind didn't want my cubs to be eaten after I had passed. I would have preferred they starved rather than end up as someone else's meal, she admitted, as she nuzzled into my stomach. But then, there you were, a small little bead in the dirt, and you aided Basmori for no reason other than you felt like it. I knew somehow that I could at least leave them in your care, and you would have watched over them as I entered my final sleep. She then rolled over onto her side, before looking up at me, while still resting her head in my lap and leaning into my touch, a smile forming on her feline face. But there you went again, not allowing me to even have that rest. You had my life, and you gave it back freely, even at cost to yourself. Time and time again, you provided for and protected our cubs, more than any mate ever would have, she said, her voice rumbling with evident affection. I suppose now that I've had time to understand my new awareness, I can see that my affections have been rather one-sided, she considered, as her tail curled and her ears flicked. She sounded more somber, but not too much as she gazed up into my eyes. I hope you'll continue to care for and look after us, even if my affections are unrequited, she said softly now, almost murmuring, as she huffed softly and proceeded to pull away. Even if Basti had been just above average in intelligence for an animal until a few days ago, she was surprisingly mature and wise now. I highly doubted all that was simply due to the influence of Dahlia's memories, so that means she had been wise and mature all on her own. I didn't let her get too far as I came up beside her and patted her upper back. This caused her to stop as she looked back up at me, settling down as she watched me intently, while her mind swelled with emotions, though she maintained a stoic expression. Basti, let me just say that I do care for you as my trusted friend, partner and ally. I started off, as I took a knee to be closer to eye level with her, even if she did have to look down at me now. However, I recognize your feelings for me, and I will not ignore them. All I ask is that you give us time. I want you to get to know me as a person, and I would like the chance to get to know you as you are now, a person like myself, I explain, as I offer a small smile. Is that all right with you? I asked gently, as I held her gaze. Basti hummed thoughtfully, returning the smile as she leaned in and pressed her forehead against mine before quickly trotting away. She soon stopped a little ways away and glanced back at me as she spoke up. I suppose it'll have to do for now, she replied coyly, one of her ears fluttering with delight as she hurried off. I couldn't help but smile as I watched her go. I could sense that she was in a much better mood than a moment ago. Getting to my feet, I made my way over to the part of the clearing where the tents had been set up. All but 2 of them had been taken down at this point, everything else having been loaded onto various drakes. Drake wardens and imperial ladies move around, working to clean up after themselves, as it were. I, of course, felt many eyes on me, though nobody actively approached me at first. That was until Tobias made his way over with a grin on his face. So, Vidmori in the flesh. I didn't think I would be seeing anything like this anytime soon, he mentioned, as he came up beside me and watched his subordinates welcome packing up. You certainly cut a rather striking figure, seeing you now. I have no doubts you are certainly a capable warrior. I couldn't help but flash a grin as I looked over at Tobias. I could tell he wasn't paying me any sort of lip service and was sincere with his words. Well, not exactly in the flesh, and while I appreciate the vote of confidence, my combat experience is limited to a type of monster called a zombie, as well as a variety of mutant variants of zombie and normal human beings. I have no doubts I'll need to reevaluate the skills and techniques in my repertoire for mana-enhanced warriors and magic users, not to mention all the strange and unique beasts and monsters I may have to encounter. Tobias looked curious about my initial comment, so I opted to just hold out my hand to him. He takes it up after a moment, as his brow quirks with mild surprise, almost immediately bringing his other hand over to feel up the rest of my arm. Wood? How interesting, he mentioned, or trailing off as he tried to examine my features with his eyes alone, while pulling away. Well, you certainly look like flesh and blood. This is some incredible spellcraft for sure, he mused kindly, as he met my gaze once more. I couldn't help but chuckle softly at his reaction, as I nodded intently. Well, I have Revere to thank for my current condition. She exhausted a considerable amount of mana to craft this avatar for me, I said, letting my arm fall to my side. Tobias nodded intently, before smiling a little more as he looked out at his subordinate again. As for your combat experience, I'm sure you will have little issue adapting to new enemies. You are already a considerably powerful being, after all. He then shot me a glance and smirked a bit. Don't forget that you are also a mana-enhanced warrior, as well as a magic user of a kind. Just train yourself in your new capabilities, and you should be able to carry yourself just fine among the rest of us, he expressed, sounding rather sincere as he patted my shoulder. It felt oddly comforting being advised by an even older and more experienced man than myself. I'm reminded of that saying, to beware the old man in a profession where others die young. I suppose it applies to both of us, but Tobias does seem to have at least a decade on me. I'll keep that in mind, I reply with a bit of a smile, as I look over at him again. When do you think you'll be back? Tobias looked at the skyline for a moment, before looking over at me once more. 2, maybe 3 weeks. I still need to inform the commander of the Southern Order of my findings here, but considering the circumstances and our current lack of a place to call home, I'm certain they'll have no quarrels about making the journey here, he explained, as he looked over his arm and absently fastened some of the straps to his braces. We will also need time to commission and escort some builders to come out here to start working on a wooden fort and living arrangements, which will need to be completed before winter starts in fall. So, all in all, lots to do, he mused with a mock sigh of exhaustion and a shrug before flashing a smirk. Thankfully, I can leave most of the more difficult work to the young ones, so there's that. I couldn't help but return the smirk with a chuckle of amusement. Yes, I suppose that's the perk of having both age and experience, I mused, before spotting Historietta making her way over. I glanced back at Tobias and held out my hand again. Stay safe on your way out. I'll see you soon. Tobias glanced over at Historietta before nodding, as he firmly took up my hand and shook it, before lowering his head in a show of respect. Thank you, again, for welcoming us on your land. I'm looking forward to our next meeting, he expressed sincerely, before pulling away and joining the other Drake Wardens in a final check of their equipment. Historietta approached as she smiled up at me. Well, I suppose this is goodbye for now, she said, as she bumped her fist against my chest. Take care of yourself, old man. I can't wait for you to visit the capital. Hopefully I'll have some stuff for you to use by then, she gushed with a mischievous look. I can't wait for another talk. Maybe we'll have some more interesting stories next time we meet, she mentioned with a clap of her hands. I offered a chuckle, as I decided to return the gesture by gently bumping her shoulder with my fist. Be careful what you wish for. There's a reason "may you live in interesting times" was often used as a curse, I mused. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. See you then, I offer, as I take a step back. She also took a couple of steps back, turning to leave before stopping and casting a glance back at me. Don't forget, you now have a friend in a high place. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call on me. I'll do what I can, she insisted, sounding rather serious now, before offering a small smile again. I couldn't help but grin a bit before bobbing my head in understanding. Sure, the same to you, after all. If you need something done and don't know who to turn to, just let me know and I'll be there. Historietta grinned at that, apparently genuinely happy by my offer, as she turned to join the Drake Wardens and her ladies-in-waiting. The group now mounted the drakes before quickly taking to the skies and heading for the horizon. I watched them for a while more, though soon enough I'm back in the moment as I rub the back of my wooden head before looking around. What to do first? Honestly, now that I'm really thinking about it, I'm just itching for a fight. It isn't long until I spot my target and make my approach with a grin on my face as I tap his side. The massive Bull King getting startled by my apparently silent approach, as he looked over at me from his seated position, chewing audibly as he crouched down on a hard vegetable of some kind. "Vemori, how may I serve you?" he asked, with measured deference while maintaining eye contact. I could feel my imaginary heart pound in anticipation of what would come next, as I flashed a grin that was as charming as I could manage. "Hey, Rionim, mind sparring with me?"